What is the difference between the Spanish Teresa and the French Teresa? I'm talking about Teresa of Avala and Teresa of the Child Jesus. There is kind of a joke between the French and the Spanish, you know. They say, well, God gave to Spain the great Teresa of Avala. We call her the Great Teresa. And he only gave to France little Teresa of the Child Jesus. And of course, the French also respond by saying, well, yeah, the way that the Great Teresa traced to go to heaven is a little more difficult than the one that the little Teresa traced to go to heaven, because she taught us the simple way. She taught us the little way, the easy way. There's a kind of a saintly joke, but of course we know that both of them are great saints. Both of them are unimaginable in their sanctity, and both of them teach us great lessons. But today, let's focus on Saint Teresa of Avila. Actually, both of their feast days are celebrated in October. Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus on October 1st, and Saint Teresa of Avila on October 16th. Saint Teresa of Avila, when we read her writings, we become in awe. Our jaw drops and we don't know what to say, because she writes with such earnestness, such simplicity, at the same time, such humility. When she talks about the mystical graces that she received, there is no way to doubt that they were not real, that they were not true, that she was not truly gifted by our Lord Jesus Christ. And there are many lessons that we can take from her life. One of the things that really stands out in her life is the role of suffering. Her first 20 years in the religious life were full of atrocious, I would say atrocious, unbearable, or I would also use the word unhuman sufferings. For you to have an idea, the first 20 years of her novitiate, of her religious life, she was so scared to go into the chapel without a book, because she felt such dryness. She felt such tepidity. She felt such a longing to love God, but the inability to love Him, that she was afraid to go without a book, because her mind, her imagination would run away. She would think about things that she didn't want to think about. She could not concentrate on prayer, but above all, she felt a great dryness. For her, entering into a chapel was like going into the Arabian desert. There was no water. There was no, sensible grace. This was for the first 20 years of her religious life. Of course, later on, she would comment that God, in those 20 years, was preparing her soul for all that she would have to do afterwards. He was teaching her not to confide in Teresa, but to confide in God, to confide in Saint Joseph, who she named her first convent after, to confide in Our Lady, who she also had great devotion to. So it was necessary for her to go through this time of trial, of great aridity, of great dryness, to later on receive all of the mystical graces that God wanted to bestow upon her, and above all to found and to reform all of the convents that she was called to do. And this is a decisive factor in many of the lives of the saints. You see, in the beginning, God asks many sufferings of them to purify their souls even more, to prepare them for great missions. Another suffering that Saint Teresa went through, she went 3 years paralyzed. For 3 years, she was paralyzed, she was bedridden, she could not move. For somebody without faith, her monastic, her religious life was over. Seeing her in that state, nobody would imagine the great good that she would do in the future. Nobody ever imagined that she would be able to get up from that bed and to do all that she did in the future. But God was forming her soul. And afterwards, full of gratitude, she thanked Him for it. She knew that God was forming her soul, that she was being purified of all of those worldly thoughts, worldly affairs that still troubled her soul, that still kept her mind busy, because she had to give herself entirely to God. God was preparing her for that great mission. And during those 3 years of her paralysis, she felt as if all of her nerves in her body were, she felt, for example, when somebody touched her, as if they were touching on her nerves. So when they had to transport her from one bed to another, they could not pick her up, but they had to grab on to the 4 corners of her bed sheet and move her from one place to another, because it was unbearable, the pain that she felt when somebody touched her or when she moved. Before this paralysis, before becoming paralyzed, she had a seizure. And she, after the seizure, went to sleep for 4 days. Everybody who saw her thought that she had died. She showed no vital signs of life. So much that when she awoke, she found out that they had already dug her grave. They thought she had died. 4 days she stayed in that state. And afterwards, she stayed paralyzed for 3 years. For the first 20 years, going to the chapel, great aridity, great dryness, as if God didn't exist. But what made her persevere was that she never gave up. She would continue going to the chapel. She did not give up. She continued praying even though it was difficult to pray. And she said that praying above all is loving. Even if I am not able to speak, even if my imagination is taken over by 100 wild thoughts, it doesn't matter, because I am always able to love. God never took away that capacity for me to love. And to pray is to love. To love is to pray. That was her motto of her entire life. One of her greatest ways of praying was just to simply imagine being in the presence of God. And when she would walk or when she would pray, she would imagine our Lord Jesus Christ in His great humanity by her side. That was her prayer. It wasn't so much with words that she prayed, but it was with her heart, it was with love. And so she would imagine our Lord by her side. She would go walking with our Lord to the gardens, to the monasteries, and she would just speak to Him as if He was there, as if He was really there, just like we speak to one of our friends or one of our family members. And that was her great way of praying, of loving our Lord Jesus Christ. And in this way, she made great advances in the way of sanctity. So when we have trouble praying, when we have trouble going to the chapel, when we find it boring, when we find it dry, that is all normal. All of the saints felt that. Or maybe they felt it at some times, maybe they felt it their entire lives. It doesn't matter. If we feel the presence of God, that is up to Him. But we can always show Him our love. And it does not mean that just because we experience dryness or aridity, that it is due to one of our faults or something that we are doing wrong. But it may just be a simple design of God, preparing us to have a more purer love for Him. Well, may the great Saint Teresa and also the little Teresa of the Child Jesus pray for all of us and help us to grow in prayer, but above all, to grow in love, to grow in sanctity. Because what the world needs today, above all, are people who know how to love what really matters. And what really matters is God. What really matters is His church. Well, that is all I have to say for today. I hope that you enjoyed this program of Following the Saints, and I look forward to seeing you in our next one. God bless. Salve Maria.